The dusty wind swept through the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge as Sarah Martinez pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon. The familiar creak of the hinges and the warm glow of oil lamps welcomed her after a long day managing the general store. At 28, Sarah had built a respectable life in this remote Colorado town, far from the painful memories that had once haunted her dreams. She nodded to Jake, the burly bartender who had become a close friend over the past 3 years. The saloon wasn't just a place for drinking and gambling, it served as the town's social center, where neighbors gathered to share news, celebrate good fortune, and support each other through hard times. Sarah often stopped by after closing her store, enjoying the warm community atmosphere that had helped heal her wounded heart. "Evening, Sarah," Jake called out, already reaching for her usual cup of coffee with a splash of whiskey. "How was business today?" "Steady as always," she replied, settling onto her favorite stool at the far end of the bar, where she could observe the room while maintaining some privacy. Mrs. Henderson finally paid her tab, and the Murphy boys bought supplies for their mining expedition up north. The saloon buzzed with typical evening activity. Ranchers discussed cattle prices and weather patterns, while card players concentrated intensely on their poker hands. The resident piano player, an elderly man named Chester, filled the air with familiar melodies that somehow made everyone feel more at home in this isolated corner of the world. Sarah sipped her drink and let her mind wander to the stack of orders waiting for her attention tomorrow. Life had found a comfortable rhythm in Cedar Ridge. She had earned the respect of the townspeople through honest business practices and genuine kindness. Many eligible bachelors had shown interest over the years, but Sarah always found polite ways to deflect their advances. She told herself she was too busy with the store, but the truth ran much deeper. The traumatic events of 7 years ago had left invisible scars that still influenced her daily life. She had been just 21 then, traveling with a small wagon train from Missouri to California, with dreams of starting fresh after her father's death. Her mother had passed away when Sarah was 16, leaving her alone in the world with nothing but determination and a small inheritance that she hoped would buy land and a new beginning. The wagon train had consisted of 3 families and several single men seeking their fortunes. Sarah traveled alone, which made some of the other travelers uncomfortable, but she had proven herself capable of handling her own wagon and supplies. The journey had been progressing smoothly until they reached the remote mountain passes of Colorado Territory. That's where everything went wrong. A band of desperate outlaws, led by a cruel man named Black Pete Morrison, had been terrorizing travelers in the region for months. They struck the wagon train at dawn when most people were still groggy from sleep and unprepared for violence. The attack came swift and merciless. Sarah still remembered every detail with crystal clarity, despite trying to forget. The thundering of horses' hooves, the crack of gunfire, the screams of terror from children and adults alike. She had hidden beneath her wagon as chaos erupted around her, watching in horror as the outlaws systematically robbed and threatened the other travelers. Black Pete himself had been the worst of them, a massive man with cruel eyes and a reputation for leaving no witnesses. When he discovered Sarah's hiding place, his intentions became immediately clear. She had fought back with desperate fury, but her strength was no match for his size and brutality. Just when all hope seemed lost, salvation had arrived in the form of a lone hunter. The man had appeared like something from a legend, moving through the morning mist with silent precision. He was tall and lean, with weathered features that spoke of years spent in the wilderness. His clothes were practical and worn, and he carried an old but well-maintained rifle with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Sarah never learned his name, but she would never forget his face or his actions that morning. The hunter had single-handedly confronted the entire outlaw gang, using the rocky terrain and his superior marksmanship to turn the tide of the encounter. His first shot had dropped Black Pete's lieutenant, and his tactical positioning had forced the remaining outlaws into a defensive position. The gunfight had lasted nearly an hour, with the hunter methodically picking off the outlaws while keeping the survivors of the wagon train safe. When the smoke finally cleared, Black Pete Morrison and 4 of his men lay dead, while the remaining 2 had fled into the mountains, never to be seen again. But the hunter's heroics came at a cost. Sarah had watched him take a bullet in the shoulder during the final moments of the fight. Blood had soaked through his shirt as he checked on the wagon train survivors, making sure everyone was safe and that the wounded received proper care. When Sarah had approached to thank him and tend to his injury, the hunter had simply touched his hat brim in acknowledgement and mounted his horse. Despite her pleas for him to stay and let her properly clean and bandage his wound, he had ridden away into the wilderness as quietly as he had arrived. The surviving members of the wagon train had continued their journey, but Sarah's plans had changed completely. The trauma of the attack, combined with the loss of several traveling companions, had convinced her that California could wait. When they reached the next settlement, which happened to be Cedar Ridge, Sarah had decided to stay and build her new life in this small but welcoming community. Now, 7 years later, she had created the peaceful existence she had always dreamed of. The general store provided a good living, and she had earned the trust and friendship of her neighbors. But she had never forgotten the mysterious hunter, who had saved not just her life, but her dignity and future. Sometimes, late at night when sleep eluded her, Sarah would wonder what had become of him. Had his wound healed properly? Was he still wandering the frontier, helping others in need? Had he survived the dangers that came with such a solitary lifestyle? She had asked traveling merchants and hunters if they knew anything about a man matching his description, but the frontier was vast, and men like him tended to avoid attention. The sound of the saloon doors opening interrupted her reverie. Sarah glanced up casually, then felt her coffee cup slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. The ceramic shattered on the floor, but she barely noticed the sound or Jake's concerned exclamation. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dusky evening light, was a figure she recognized despite 7 years and the accumulated wear of hard living. He was older now, with more lines around his eyes and gray threading through his dark hair, but there was no mistaking the quiet confidence in his posture or the alert way his eyes scanned the room. It was him, the hunter, who had saved her life. Sarah's heart began racing as memories flooded back with overwhelming intensity. She gripped the edge of the bar to steady herself, unable to look away as the man stepped fully into the saloon. He moved with the same careful economy of motion she remembered, and when his gaze swept across the room, she saw the same sharp intelligence that had made him such a formidable opponent to Black Pete's gang. He approached the bar, nodding politely to Jake while remaining aware of his surroundings in the way that marked him as someone who had spent years living in dangerous territory. When he spoke to order a whiskey, his voice was exactly as Sarah remembered, quiet but carrying an underlying strength that commanded respect without demanding it. "You passing through or staying a while?" Jake asked conversationally as he poured the drink. "Depends," the hunter replied, accepting the glass with a slight nod of thanks. "Looking for some information about mining claims in the area. Heard there might be opportunities for someone willing to work hard." Sarah found herself studying every detail of his appearance, searching for signs of how the years had treated him. He looked healthy and strong despite obvious evidence of a life spent outdoors in all weather. His clothes were well maintained but practical, and his equipment showed the care of someone who depended on his tools for survival. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were the same clear gray she remembered, alert and thoughtful, but now they held a weariness that hadn't been there 7 years ago. She wondered what experiences had put that look there, what hardships he had endured in the intervening years. As if sensing her scrutiny, the hunter's gaze moved in her direction. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded saloon, and Sarah felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly, as if he too was trying to place a half-remembered face. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Should she approach him? What would she say? How could she possibly express her gratitude for what he had done? And what if she was wrong? What if this wasn't the same man at all, but simply someone who bore a resemblance to her rescuer? But deep in her heart, she knew there was no mistake. This was definitely the hunter who had saved her life, who had risked everything to protect a group of strangers from brutal outlaws. The same man who had disappeared into the wilderness without even giving his name, leaving her with nothing but gratitude and unanswered questions. The hunter had turned back to his drink, engaging in quiet conversation with Jake about local conditions and opportunities. Sarah listened carefully, hoping to learn more about his current circumstances and intentions. It seemed he was genuinely considering settling in the area, at least temporarily, which both thrilled and terrified her. She had spent 7 years wondering about this man, building him up in her memory as an almost mythical figure. Now he was here, real and human and vulnerable in ways that her memory had perhaps forgotten. The reality of his presence brought back not just gratitude, but a complex mixture of emotions she wasn't sure how to handle. As the evening wore on, Sarah remained at her spot at the bar, acutely aware of the hunter's presence even when she wasn't looking directly at him. She noticed how other patrons seemed to sense something different about him. Not threatening, but definitely not ordinary. Men who spent their lives dealing with danger developed instincts about such things, and several of the local ranchers and miners had nodded respectfully in his direction. Eventually, the hunter finished his drink and stood to leave. As he passed behind Sarah's stool on his way to the door, she felt him pause for just a moment. When she looked up, their eyes met again, and this time she was certain she saw recognition in his gaze. "Ma'am," he said quietly, touching his hat brim in the same gesture she remembered from 7 years ago. Sir, she managed to reply, her voice barely above a whisper. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah with her heart pounding and her mind spinning with possibilities. Jake noticed her distress and moved closer with concern written across his weathered face. You all right, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, she supposed she had. The hunter represented a part of her past she had never expected to encounter again, a chapter she had thought was permanently closed. His presence in Cedar Ridge opened up questions and possibilities she wasn't sure she was ready to face. But one thing was certain, she couldn't simply pretend this encounter hadn't happened. Tomorrow, she would have to decide what, if anything, to do about the mysterious hunter who had saved her life and then vanished into legend, only to reappear in her quiet frontier town 7 years later. Sarah barely slept that night. She tossed and turned in her small apartment above the general store, her mind replaying every detail of the brief encounter at the Silver Dollar Saloon. By dawn, she had made a decision that both excited and terrified her. She would find a way to approach the hunter and properly thank him for what he had done 7 years ago. The morning brought its usual routine of opening the store, checking inventory, and greeting the early customers who needed supplies before heading out to their daily work. But Sarah found herself distracted, constantly glancing toward the window that faced the main street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man who had occupied her thoughts all night. Around mid-morning, her opportunity came. She spotted him walking slowly down the street, examining the various businesses with the careful attention of someone considering making this place his home. He paused in front of her store, reading the hand-painted sign that proclaimed Martinez General Goods, fair prices, honest dealing. Sarah's heart raced as she watched him push through the front door, the bell above it chiming softly. He moved with the same quiet confidence she remembered, his eyes quickly taking in the layout of the store and the locations of the exits. Habits ingrained by years of living on the dangerous frontier. "Good morning," Sarah managed to say, proud that her voice sounded steady despite her inner turmoil. "Can I help you find something?" The hunter approached the counter where she stood, and Sarah noticed details that had been hidden in the dim light of the saloon. His face was more weathered than she remembered, with small scars that spoke of encounters with both wild animals and dangerous men. His hands were strong and calloused, with the steady bearing of someone who had learned to rely on quick reflexes and accurate shooting. "I'm looking for basic supplies," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority she recalled. "Planning to stay in the area for a while, maybe permanently if things work out right." "Of course," Sarah replied, moving out from behind the counter. "What kind of work are you planning to do? That might help me recommend the right supplies. Hunting, trapping, maybe some prospecting if I can find the right claim. I've heard there's good country north of here that hasn't been fully explored yet." As Sarah gathered the items he requested, ammunition, preserved food, rope, basic tools, she searched for the courage to reveal her identity. The hunter seemed vaguely aware that he recognized her, but clearly couldn't place where or when they had met. She noticed him glancing at her face with the puzzled expression of someone trying to solve a half-remembered puzzle. "You're new to Cedar Ridge," Sarah said as she wrapped his purchases. "But something tells me you've been in Colorado territory for a long time." The hunter's gray eyes sharpened slightly, as if her comment had triggered some deeper memory. "I've been wandering these mountains for more years than I care to count. Sometimes the places and faces start to blur together." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tied the package with twine. This was her moment. She could either reveal the truth or let him leave without ever knowing how their lives had intersected years before. 7 years ago, she began carefully, I was traveling with a wagon train through the mountain passes west of here. We were attacked by outlaws led by a man called Black Pete Morrison. The hunter went completely still, his eyes fixing on Sarah's face with sudden, intense focus. She could see the exact moment when recognition dawned, when the young woman he had saved transformed in his memory into the mature store owner standing before him. "You were hiding under the wagon," he said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and something else she couldn't quite identify. "The one they were." He stopped, unwilling to voice what they both knew Black Pete had intended. "Yes," Sarah whispered, "and you saved my life. You saved all of us, but you rode away before I could properly thank you. I never even learned your name." The hunter set down the package and leaned against the counter, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Sarah," he said finally. "Your name was Sarah. I remember now. One of the other women called out to you during the fighting." "Sarah Martinez," she confirmed. "And you are?" "Thomas Brennan," he replied. Most people just call me Tom. The simple exchange of names seemed to break down a barrier that had existed between them since he had walked into her store. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she finally had a name to attach to the face that had haunted her grateful memories for 7 years. Tom Brennan, she repeated softly, I've wondered about you so many times. Whether you survived, whether your wound healed properly, whether you continued helping people in trouble. Tom's hand moved unconsciously to his left shoulder, where Sarah remembered seeing the bloodstain spread across his shirt. The wound healed fine, left a scar, but that's about all. As for helping people, he shrugged. I do what I can when I come across trouble. It's not something I set out looking for, but you did that day. You could have simply ridden past our wagon train, minded your own business. Instead, you risked everything to help complete strangers. Those weren't just bandits, Tom said, his voice hardening. Black Pete Morrison and his gang had been terrorizing travelers through those passes for months. Someone had to stop them, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right skills. Sarah studied his face, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke about the outlaws. She sensed there was more to the story, some personal motivation that had driven him to take such dangerous action. Had you encountered them before? She asked gently. Tom was quiet for a long moment, seemingly debating whether to share more of his history. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old pain. They hit a ranch about 50 miles south of there a few weeks earlier. Killed the family. Burned everything. I'd been tracking them ever since, waiting for the right opportunity to bring them to justice. The right opportunity meaning when you could face them without innocent people getting caught in the crossfire? Exactly. When I heard the gunshots that morning and saw what was happening to your wagon train, I knew it was time to act. I couldn't let them hurt any more people. Sarah felt a deep warmth spread through her chest as she realized the full implications of what Tom was telling her. He hadn't just happened upon their situation by chance. He had been deliberately hunting dangerous criminals, putting himself at risk to protect innocent settlers and travelers. You're not just a hunter, she said with growing understanding. You're something like a lawman, aren't you? Or at least someone who took it upon himself to bring justice where there wasn't any official law. Tom's smile was rueful. Official law is pretty scarce in these parts. Sometimes ordinary people have to step up and do what's necessary to protect their communities. Is that why you never stayed in one place long? Because you were always chasing outlaws and criminals? Partly, he admitted. But also because I never felt like I belonged in civilized places. Towns, settlements, they're for people who know how to live normal lives. I've been on my own in the wilderness for so long that I sometimes forget how to be around regular folks. Sarah felt her heart ache at the loneliness she heard in his voice. She could imagine the isolation of his lifestyle, always moving, always vigilant, never allowing himself the luxury of putting down roots or forming lasting connections. But you're considering staying in Cedar Ridge? She pointed out. What's different now? Tom looked around the store, taking in the evidence of Sarah's successful business and stable life. I'm getting older, not as fast as I used to be, and the wilderness is becoming more dangerous rather than less. Maybe it's time to see if I can learn to live like normal people do. There's nothing normal about the people in Cedar Ridge, Sarah said with a slight smile. We're all refugees from somewhere else, people who came out here looking for fresh starts and new opportunities. Nobody judges anyone for their past as long as they contribute to the community. And what would someone like me contribute? I'm good at tracking and shooting, but those aren't exactly everyday skills in a settled town. Are you serious? Sarah asked with surprise. Tom, we're still on the frontier. Predators, both animal and human, are constant threats. The sheriff covers a territory bigger than some eastern states, and he can't be everywhere at once. A man with your skills and experience would be invaluable to this community. She could see him considering her words, weighing the possibilities against his ingrained habits of solitude and mobility. The idea of settling down clearly both appealed to and frightened him. Besides, Sarah continued, you mentioned prospecting and mining. This whole region is full of claims that need to be worked. A man who knows the wilderness could probably identify promising areas that others might overlook. You make it sound possible, Tom said quietly. It is possible. More than possible. It's exactly what this community needs and what you deserve after all the years you've spent helping others. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several customers, forcing Sarah to return to her normal routine of helping with purchases and answering questions about products. But she remained acutely aware of Tom's presence as he browsed the store, examining her stock with the careful attention of someone evaluating quality and value. When the other customers had left, Tom approached the counter again. You've built something impressive here, he said, gesturing to encompass the well-organized store and the obvious prosperity it represented. After what happened to the wagon train, I wasn't sure you'd have the strength to start over. I almost didn't, Sarah admitted. The first year was very difficult, but the people of Cedar Ridge took me in and gave me a chance to prove myself. I've tried to repay that kindness by being honest in my business and helpful to anyone who needs it. That's my job. Just like someone else I could mention, Tom observed with a slight smile. Sarah felt herself blushing at the implied comparison. I hardly think running a general store compares to what you've done. Don't underestimate the importance of what you do. A store like this is the backbone of a frontier community. People depend on you for supplies, information, and stability. That's just as valuable as anything I've contributed. As the afternoon progressed, Tom lingered in the store much longer than necessary for a simple supply run. They talked about the town, the people, the opportunities and challenges of life on the frontier. Sarah found herself more comfortable with him than she had been with any man since arriving in Cedar Ridge. There was something about Tom's quiet competence and evident integrity that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't experienced since before the wagon train attack. He listened carefully to what she said, asked thoughtful questions, and treated her opinions with respect. Most importantly, he seemed to understand the lasting impact of traumatic experiences without requiring detailed explanations or expressions of pity. As evening approached, Sarah realized she didn't want their conversation to end. The connection she felt to this man went beyond simple gratitude for past heroics. There was something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both found ways to rebuild their lives after experiencing the worst the frontier could offer. The Silver Dollar serves decent meals, she said as she began closing up the store. If you're planning to eat there tonight, I usually stop by after I finish here. Tom's eyes met hers, and she saw understanding pass between them. I'd like that, he said simply. There's a lot more I'd like to know about how you built this life for yourself. And I'd like to hear about some of your adventures, if you don't mind sharing them. Some of them, Tom agreed with a smile. The ones that won't give you nightmares. As Sarah locked up the store and they walked together toward the saloon, she felt a sense of completeness she hadn't realized was missing from her life. The mysterious hunter who had saved her had returned, not as an unreachable legend, but as a real man considering making a home in her community. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. 3 months had passed since Tom Brennan had walked into Sarah's store and back into her life. True to his word, he had decided to make Cedar Ridge his permanent home, purchasing a small cabin on the outskirts of town and establishing himself as the unofficial guardian of the surrounding territory. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Tom struggled with the social aspects of community life, often seeming uncomfortable at town gatherings and church services. Years of solitude had made him more comfortable with silence than conversation, and he sometimes appeared overwhelmed by the friendly curiosity of his new neighbors. But his value to the community quickly became apparent. When wolves threatened the Johnson family's livestock, Tom tracked them to their den and resolved the problem without endangering the animals unnecessarily. When travelers reported bandits operating along the mountain road, Tom investigated and discovered the culprits were actually desperate prospectors whose claims had played out. He helped them find work rather than turning them over to the distant sheriff. Most importantly to Sarah, Tom had begun healing from the emotional wounds that years of dangerous, isolated living had inflicted. She watched him gradually relax in social situations, saw him begin to trust that he could have a normal life without constantly looking over his shoulder for threats. Their own relationship had developed slowly and carefully. Both of them carried scars from their past experiences, and neither wanted to rush into something that might jeopardize the friendship and mutual respect they had built. But Sarah couldn't deny the growing feelings she harbored for the quiet, honorable man who had saved her life and was now becoming an integral part of her daily world. Tom, for his part, seemed equally cautious but interested. He made a point of stopping by the store most mornings for coffee and conversation, and he often appeared to escort Sarah to the saloon for dinner. Their talks ranged over everything from practical matters like town politics and business opportunities to deeper subjects like their hopes for the future and the lessons they had learned from their difficult pasts. The whole situation came to a head on a warm spring evening when trouble arrived in Cedar Ridge in the form of 3 hard-looking men who rode into town just after sunset. Sarah was closing the store when she heard the commotion outside, raised voices, the sound of horses moving restlessly, and an underlying tension that made her instinctively nervous. She peered out her window and felt her blood turn cold. The 3 men were clearly cut from the same cloth as Black Pete Morrison's gang, rough, dangerous, and looking for trouble. They had stopped in front of the Silver Dollar and were demanding information about someone, their voices carrying the kind of threat that made honest people want to disappear. Sarah's first instinct was to stay hidden in her store until the strangers moved on, but then she saw Tom emerge from the saloon and position himself between the mounted men and the gathered townspeople. Even from a distance, she could see the subtle change in his posture that indicated he was ready for violence if it became necessary. Unable to stay away when Tom might be in danger, Sarah quietly left her store through the back door and made her way closer to the confrontation, staying in the shadows but positioning herself where she could see and hear what was happening. "We're looking for a man," the leader of the three strangers was saying. He was a lean, scarred individual with the cold eyes of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. Goes by the name Thomas Brennan. "We heard he might have settled in this area." "Lots of people settle in this area," Tom replied calmly. "Mind if I ask what business you have with this Brennan fellow?" The stranger's laugh was ugly and humorless. "He killed my brother 7 years ago. Shot him down in cold blood during a disagreement over some mining rights. I've been tracking him ever since, and I finally got word that he's been seen in this territory." Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized what was happening. These men weren't looking for Tom because of his work as an unofficial lawman. They were relatives of the outlaws he had killed while saving the wagon train. The disagreement over mining rights was obviously their version of the attack on innocent travelers. 7 years is a long time to hold a grudge, Tom observed, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge that Sarah recognized as a warning. "Not long enough," the stranger snarled. "Pete Morrison was my brother, and nobody kills family without paying for it. This Brennan thinks he can hide out in some quiet town and live a peaceful life, but he's wrong. I'm Ezra Morrison, and I've come to settle accounts." Sarah saw several of the townspeople exchange glances, clearly recognizing Tom's name and beginning to understand the dangerous situation developing in their peaceful community. To their credit, none of them moved away from Tom or showed any inclination to abandon him to face the threat alone. "Ezra Morrison," Tom repeated thoughtfully. "I remember now. You were one of the two who ran away when your brother's gang got what they deserved. I wondered if you'd ever work up the courage to face me directly instead of just running." The insult hit home, and Ezra Morrison's hand dropped to his gun. His two companions spread out slightly, creating a classic confrontation formation that would give them multiple angles of fire. "You murdered my brother and 4 good men," Ezra snarled. "Your brother and his gang were attacking a wagon train full of innocent people," Tom replied, his own hand now resting casually near his weapon. "They were robbing and terrorizing families, and they would have killed witnesses to cover their crimes. I stopped them from committing murder and worse." "That's a lie! Ask anyone who was on that wagon train." "Oh wait, you can't, because your brother made sure most of them are dead now. But there's one survivor living right here in Cedar Ridge who can tell you exactly what kind of man Pete Morrison really was." Sarah felt every eye turn in her direction as Tom gestured toward her hiding place. With no choice but to step forward, she moved into the circle of lamplight, her chin raised defiantly despite her fear. "This is Sarah Martinez," Tom continued. "She was on that wagon train. She saw what your brother and his gang did to innocent people, and she saw me stop them before they could commit even worse crimes." Ezra Morrison's cold gaze fixed on Sarah, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes. "You're the woman Pete was going to, the one hiding under the wagon." "Yes," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent street. "And your brother wasn't interested in mining rights or any other legitimate business. He and his gang attacked our wagon train at dawn, killed several people, and were in the process of robbing and terrorizing the survivors when Tom arrived. Your brother was a murderer and worse, and Tom Brennan saved my life and the lives of everyone else who survived that attack." The truth hit the gathered townspeople with visible impact. Several men stepped forward to stand with Tom, making it clear that this was no longer a personal dispute but a threat to their community and one of its most valued members. "She's lying to protect her man," Ezra snarled, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "I'm telling the truth," Sarah replied firmly, "and Tom Brennan isn't just my man. He's a hero who risked his own life to save complete strangers from your murderous brother." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with both sides clearly prepared for violence. But Sarah could see that Ezra Morrison was beginning to realize he had misjudged the situation. He had expected to find a man hiding from his past, not someone who was respected and protected by an entire community. Finally, Sheriff Henderson arrived from the county seat, having been summoned by one of the townspeople who had quietly slipped away when the confrontation began. A grizzled veteran of many frontier conflicts, the sheriff quickly assessed the situation and positioned himself strategically. "Ezra Morrison," he said calmly, "I've been wondering when you'd surface again. There's still a warrant out for your arrest in connection with those wagon train attacks 7 years ago." The revelation that the law was also looking for the Morrison gang survivors changed everything. Ezra and his companions found themselves facing not just Tom and the townspeople, but an armed lawman with legal authority to arrest them. "You've got no proof of anything," Ezra protested, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I've got witness testimony," the sheriff replied, nodding toward Sarah. "And I've got the testimony of other wagon train survivors who identified you as one of the gang members who escaped. You boys can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." The confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with handcuffs. Ezra Morrison and his companions were arrested and taken away to face justice for their crimes, while Tom was publicly acknowledged as the hero who had stopped their murderous gang years earlier. In the aftermath, as the crowd began to disperse and normal life slowly returned to Cedar Ridge, Sarah found herself alone with Tom in front of the general store. The events of the evening had forced both of them to confront truths they had been avoiding. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Tom said quietly. "I never wanted my past to bring danger to this community or to you." "Your past?" Sarah replied with surprise. "Tom, your past is what makes you the man you are. You spent years protecting innocent people from criminals and outlaws. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. It's also something that will always make me a target for people seeking revenge." Sarah stepped closer to him, reaching out to take his hands in hers. "Then we'll face those threats together. You're not alone anymore, Tom. You have a community that values you and people who care about you." "People?" Sarah felt her heart racing as she prepared to voice feelings she had been holding back for months. "You have me, if you want me. I know we've been cautious, taking things slowly, but after tonight I can't pretend anymore. I care about you, Tom Brennan, not just because you saved my life 7 years ago, but because of who you are now, because of the man you've become and the life we could build together." Tom's response was to pull her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he was afraid she might disappear like so many other good things in his life. "I've been afraid to hope for something like this," he whispered against her hair, "afraid that my past would destroy any chance at a normal life with someone like you." "There's nothing normal about any of us out here," Sarah reminded him, echoing what she had said months earlier. "We're all people who faced hardships and made difficult choices. What matters is what we do with the chances we're given." As they stood together in the warm evening air, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of their community settling down for the night, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion. The mysterious hunter who had saved her life had become the man she loved, and together they had faced down the ghosts of their shared past. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities, the chance to build a life together, to continue serving their community, and to create the kind of happiness that both of them had thought was beyond their reach. Tom's days of solitary wandering were over, and Sarah's long wait for love had finally ended. In the distance, the Silver Dollar Saloon continued to serve as the social heart of Cedar Ridge, where neighbors gathered to support each other through good times and bad. It was there that Sarah had first recognized the hunter who had saved her, and it was there that their love story had truly begun. But their real reunion had taken place not in the saloon, but in the quiet moments of daily life when two wounded souls had discovered they could heal together. The dangerous confrontation with Ezra Morrison had only served to confirm what both of them had already begun to understand. They belonged together, and together they could face whatever challenges the frontier might send their way. As they walked hand in hand toward Tom's cabin to begin their new life together, Sarah reflected on the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. A wagon train attack that could have destroyed her life had instead led her to safety and eventually to love. A man who had thought himself destined for permanent solitude had found a home and a partner who understood his past and embraced his future. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the worst experiences in life were also the ones that led to the greatest blessings, and sometimes the heroes who saved others were the ones who most needed saving themselves.